From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to an episode of WisPolitics Capital Chats brought to you by Spectrum. My name is Kate Morton. I'm a reporter with WisPolitics.com, and I'm here with my colleague Adam Kellenhofer, who just did an interview with Representative Darrin Madison of Milwaukee. So, Adam, what are some of the things you touched on in that interview?
Hi, Kate. Yeah, so we talked a bit about some of his legislative priorities, and it sounds like his most important priority is to kind of work on reforming the criminal justice system for juveniles. And a lot of that work is going to center around the Lincoln Hills replacement and Lincoln Hills itself. So let's just dive right into the interview. I'm here with Representative Darrin Madison. He's a freshman of Milwaukee. He represents some portions of the North Shore suburbs in the Milwaukee area. It's great to have you here today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So, Representative Madison, what is your top priority this legislative session? Or if you have multiple priorities, what are they?
Yeah, absolutely. So my biggest priority is figuring out tangible solutions to support young people who have been incarcerated. Right now, we are planning to, of course, build a type 1 facility here in Milwaukee County to house young people who are classified as serious juvenile offenders, a status that is supremely outdated in the country. We're one of a few states that still have it, which require us to have these facilities. But that facility will only hold young men, and young women will be placed in Mendota, which is our adult mental health correctional facility. In my opinion, the worst place that they can be, and it's a display of how little we are willing to invest in ensuring that young women are also supported and rehabilitation in our state system. So I'm trying to ensure that there are protections in place for them. And we are making some bold investments in particularly opportunity youth future, right? Some people might not know the term opportunity youth. That means, that's a classification of young people between the ages of 16 and 24 that are out of school and out of work. Those are young people who have navigated the foster care system, young people who have navigated our youth justice system, and some young people have just been pushed out of our educational system. So my first term is dedicated to making sure that they are a priority, and all my committees align with that vision.
Got it. So you are an open socialist, a democratic socialist, right?
Absolutely.
I saw, I think it was last week, that the DSA of Milwaukee is voicing some opposition to that new, that Lincoln Hills replacement facility that you just referenced. What do you think of that opposition, and what do you think of that type 1 facility proposal?
Yeah, so, I was a part of the efforts to pass Act 185, which was the piece of legislation that led to the closure of Lincoln Hills, or is leading to the closure of Lincoln Hills because it's still open, even though it was supposed to close 2 years ago. The initial proposal was to invest in the secure residential care centers for youth, in a long-term trajectory of ending youth incarceration. I believe that we should be moving towards the ending of youth incarceration in the entire country, in the state of Wisconsin, in Milwaukee County, and that's a big lift, right? As we think about the needs of young people and the needs of our broader community, as we're navigating a series of public safety issues. But we need to put our best foot forward. I'm not in favor of the establishment of this type 1 facilities, because we know when we build prisons, they're never dismantled, they're never truly closed, they always end up becoming another prison. Lincoln Hills, when we close down Lincoln Hills, it'll become another prison. And we know the history of of what happens when we have these facilities and we have these beds. We fill them, right? Because we've made this investment in this model. So we will continue to perpetuate this model of how we navigate public safety, how we navigate rehabilitation, how we navigate care. I'm not in favor of this facility, but I understand the constraints that we're in. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to be silent about those constraints, about my vision and the community's collective vision as it relates to what we should be doing to invest in the future of young people.
Fair enough. Makes sense to me. So I guess, kind of sticking with the socialism thing here, because we honestly haven't seen that a lot in the state capitol as of late. And it's an interesting kind of shift in direction here. Not entirely the direction, but what do you think the Socialist Party, the Democratic Socialist Party, what does that bring to the table when coming to the state capitol?
Yeah, it brings a different perspective that centers working class citizens. Commonly, as we think about legislation and as we think about even the approach to change in supporting all Wisconsinites, it's from the perspective of how do we continue to create more business? How do we continue to ensure that we're sustaining our economy from the perspective of capitalism? Democratic socialism pushes the boundaries and establishes the fact that capitalism is a system in which folks who have access to wealth oppress folks who don't. That's the approach, and that is how we're going to center the values of working class folks from looking at how do we create an economy, how do we create opportunities for working class folks to fully participate in our broader society, whether that's cooperatively owned housing, right, which has been in the boom around the nation, whether that's cooperatively owned businesses, whether that's realistic democratically controlled government, and things like participatory budgeting, which is another fight that I've been a part of at the city level with the African American Roundtable, which has been pushing for a true opportunity for residents to be able to have a real decision-making power as it pertains to the city's budget. Cities throughout the country have done that. States have been exploring it. And I think we should be exploring it in our state as well. We know that when we give people the opportunity to voice their thoughts and their opinions and have real decision-making power, it radically transforms the society we live in for the better.
All right. So just kind of sticking a little bit with that city of Milwaukee work that you've done. Obviously, you represent a portion of Milwaukee. One of the big topics with Milwaukee has been crime. Do you have any sort of proposals to kind of address crime or try to dial crime back, basically, in Milwaukee?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is looking at best practices as it relates to issues of crime throughout the country. Especially Milwaukee has issues with reckless driving, and commonly the first thing that comes to mind that folks think of is we need to invest in more policing. We need to incarcerate more folks who are committing these crimes. That's not a realistic long-term solution, right? We need to invest in deterrence to reckless driving, like changing actual city infrastructure. The city of Milwaukee is already going through the process right now of re-examining how we plan our streets, how we plan our streets and our communities around people, and not not vehicles, right? If we do that, right, we reduce the amount of opportunities for folks to reckless drive, and that crime inherently decreases, right? If we don't make the investments in changing city infrastructure, and we just increase officers, that will reduce to extent the amount of folks recklessly driving, but eventually those folks will be back out in our communities, and the behavior won't change because we're not planning in a way that addresses the root causes of the issues.
Got it. Yeah. So you want to address, the root causes. Got it. So, I know you're from the Milwaukee area. You don't live in Shorewood, but you do represent Shorewood. Shorewood's been an interesting area over, the course of Wisconsin history, I suppose. Shorewood is the home of the only, let me make sure I get this right, the only Supreme Court Chief Justice to come from Wisconsin. William Rehnquist actually graduated from Shorewood High School. He was a conservative, and he was very opposed to the right to receive abortions, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You're pretty far in the other way of things on the spectrum of left and right. What do you think about that kind of shift in the electorate in that district?
Well, I think that what happened and what happens generally and what's happening all over the state is that folks are beginning to understand that conservative values infringe on their individual rights. And Shorewood's it's actually probably one of the most progressive, progressive villages in the state, right? At least since I've seen it, right? I've been doing work in Shorewood since I was 14. And, over the years, I've seen Shorewood do more and more to ensure that it's making bold investments in the right direction to ensure that all residents, regardless of their, regardless of their marginal backgrounds, have the opportunity to participate in community. I think it's interesting that that history exists, though. I mean, though it doesn't surprise me, right? Wisconsin in general has a legacy of being, one of the founder of has a history of being the founder of a lot of hate groups throughout the country, right? Milwaukee has a history of being the most segregated city in the country, right? And a lot of the suburbs in Milwaukee County have been sundown towns, right? So, this doesn't surprise me, but what does surprise me is the interesting trajectory of the North Shore and how it's moving more towards progressive values, even beyond Shorewood, in Whitefish Bay, in Fox Point, in Glendale, which I now represent and got added to the 10th Assembly District, and so on. So even as far as to support a Democratic Socialist running for Assembly, it's interesting to see. And it exists in this point of history for our state.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. Though, full disclosure, I am a Shorewood High School graduate, so I think pretty much anything to do with Shorewood history is interesting. But nonetheless, I think that was an interesting fact. So that's all the time I have. Those are all the questions I have time for today. But thank you so much for joining me, Representative Madison. It was a great interview, and I'm glad to have you on.
Absolutely.
Well, Adam, thanks for sharing that interview with us, and we'll have to keep a close eye on what ends up happening with that Lincoln Hills replacement and how that unfolds within the Democratic caucus.
Yeah, Kate, if our listeners want to see more history about Lincoln Hills, they can head over to our website and use the search function on wispolitics.com. But for now, I'm Adam Kelnhofer.
I'm Kate Morton.
Thanks for tuning in to Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.